Hello and welcome. I'm Imran Garda, sitting in for Riz Khan. No regrets. That's how former State Department spokesperson PJ Crowley feels about his strong remarks that led to his forced resignation last month. Crowley came under fire after he described US treatment of alleged WikiLeaks source Bradley Manning as ridiculous, counterproductive and stupid. The controversy comes at a tricky time for US President Barack Obama, who has just launched his 2012 re-election campaign amidst increasing criticism for what many view as a selective response to Middle East uprisings that are becoming more violent. Well, today we ask, among other things, has the Obama administration failed to deliver on promises of transparency, and should public officials be allowed to question US foreign policy? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or email, and we also welcome your phone calls on the show. Well, I'm delighted to inform you, PJ Crowley is with us. Thanks a lot for joining us, Mr. Crowley. The treatment of Bradley Manning, is it still ridiculous, still counterproductive, still stupid?
I said what I said, and I stand by what I said because I think it undermines an otherwise legitimate prosecution. WikiLeaks is unprecedented in its scope and its breadth of impact. I mean, in the United States, we've had leaks before. Usually one person with maybe a folder full of documents, passing those documents to another country. There's some reporting on it, and then it moves along. But 251,000 documents touches on virtually every relationship the United States has with other countries around the world. So the impact has been there. It's important in a digital age to send a strong message that those who are charged with protecting information need to do just that. In my view, Bradley Manning is facing a serious charge, and rightfully so. And yet the treatment that he has experienced at the Marine Corps brig, in my judgment, undermined a prosecution that I think is very legitimate and very necessary.
Were you forced to resign?
I chose to resign. I said what I said to highlight what I thought was actions that undermine our policy and undermine our standing in the world. I didn't say what I said to create a controversy. Once that controversy evolved, it was my judgment that the best for me to do is resign.
Did you feel betrayed in any way? That there was no effort to try and make you reconsider, perhaps?
No, as a political appointee, I serve at the pleasure of the president. I understand that my remarks, created this controversy. It was my decision to resign. That said, I stand by what I said, and I still think the treatment of Bradley Manning is counterproductive.
Well, you have a president who's on Twitter, on Facebook, who believes in open government, and who said, and I quote, "I don't want to have people who just agree with me. I want people around me who are continually pushing me out of my comfort zone." Isn't that a bit hypocritical when he accepts your resignation? He could have called you and said, "PJ, please stay."
I'll defer to the White House on the implications of this. I thought it was my responsibility as the Assistant Secretary of State, to highlight where I thought that our actions were inconsistent with our strategic narrative. I think that we, in order to lead as we do around the world, we have to be seen as practicing what we preach. I thought that the treatment of Bradley Manning was inconsistent with both our values and, more importantly, inconsistent, with our long-term interests.
Inconsistent with your values up until the Manning incident, if you like. Did you feel that U.S. policy was consistent with your values?
Policy in what regard?
Wherever, as a State Department spokesperson, did you have no qualms with what you were representing up until the Manning incident?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would stand at the State Department podium every day and represent the foreign policy of the United States, explain it to the American people, explain it to audiences around the world. If I didn't think I could defend the policy, then I had no business being at the podium.
You wrote a few op-eds after you had left. In one of them, you said regarding WikiLeaks, "Taken as a whole, the cables tell a compelling story of right-doing, as opposed to wrongdoing, of course. As a nation, we are proud of the story the cables tell, even as we decry their release." Do you still completely believe that?
I do. Absolutely. I mean, as I said in that same piece in The Guardian, you can always take one cable and say you take exception with the policy that's represented there. That's fine. But on balance, I think what people see is that what we say in public and what we say in private are broadly consistent. And you had diplomats from the United States serving our country, our interests, and our interests we think coincide with the interests of other countries and other regions of the world. Other governments do the same thing.
But I hope you're not going to think I'm cherry-picking just a random incident from WikiLeaks. But, for example, the revelation on spying, serious revelation, the fact that diplomats ordered by your former boss, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and her predecessor, Condoleezza Rice, were told to gather intelligence on UN leadership, including Ban Ki-moon, secret directives to over 30 embassies, calling for iris scans, DNA data, computer passwords, credit card details of senior diplomats and officials. You can't tell me you were comfortable with that, were you?
Well, there's a document and then there's the practice. The document is that periodically the intelligence community does say to diplomats, hey, if you run across this kind of stuff, we'd be interested. But they didn't change the primary function of diplomats. They're diplomats. They talk to contacts from other countries. They talk to government leaders. They talk to government officials. They talk to private activists. They report that information, back to Washington. That informs our policy. It didn't, that cable did not in any way, shape, or form change the role of diplomats.
Was that spying? Now, while you're outside, would you define that as spying?
No, that document did not turn diplomats into spies. And as a practical matter, most people, they read that cable and filed it.
Right. I want to play you a clip of an interview you had with me in January, very soon after Zain al-Abidin bin Ali had fled Tunisia. Let's have a look at this and chat after that.
The decision on who will lead Tunisia in the future is a decision to be made by the Tunisian people in a process that they are allowed to participate in. We want to see credible elections.
You say there have not been free and fair elections in Tunisia for some time. Would it not be appropriate then for the US government to maybe apologize to the people of Tunisia for supporting Zain al-Abidin bin Ali for 23 years while those elections, those sham elections occurred?
No.
Why not?
We have nothing to apologize for, but we support the people of Tunisia. We want to see a government that meets the aspirations of the Tunisian people, and we are willing to be helpful in any way we can.
Now that went on for a bit. I quoted you, Colin Powell, saying that Tunisia was an ally. Zain al-Abidin bin Ali's Tunisia was an ally. Donald Rumsfeld saying that Tunisia was a democracy and a moderate Muslim country, good for investment, etc. You were quite sturdy in your defense that the policy was consistent and that there might have been things said in private, not necessarily in public, to put pressure on the Tunisian government during bin Ali's 23 years in charge. Do you still, when you see that now, do you find yourself defending the indefensible, or do you find that you were by and large consistent with what you believe now outside of the State Department?
I wouldn't change anything I said in that clip. It was the United States that put bin Ali in power, and it was not the United States that kept him in power. He had his own ability to maintain power. That said, once it's clear that the Tunisian people want something different, we supported that change. It's very consistent with our policy across the region. It's not for us to determine who will lead a particular country, but we are in fact encouraging, in a variety of ways, social, economic, and political reform.
How would you advise someone like Mark Toner now, who's State Department spokesperson, for example, and I know you don't like to talk about hypotheticals, but for example, if President Ali Abdullah Saleh of Yemen falls anytime now, he's going to similarly face the music, if you like, of people saying, well, the United States supported Yemen for so long while he was busy traumatizing his people.
Well, we have a relationship with Yemen. President Saleh has been the leader of Yemen, and it's clear that he has lost support. He's got a tribal split. His chief of staff has moved in a different direction. We want to see a process that gives the choice of who leads Yemen to the Yemeni people. That has been our view all along, but it's not for us to try to impose, a solution on Yemen that the people will not want.
Let's take a caller now. Al from Virginia. Al, go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Crowley.
Hi, Al.
You said you believed in all policies you defended. We observed two very different policies in total contradiction to each other between Bahrain and in Libya and other countries. So U.S. foreign policy in Bahrain is totally contradictory, supporting dictators and allowing Saudi Arabia to invade the country, and we're not saying anything about that. What would be your position and comments on that?
Okay, Al, thanks a lot for that. Great point made by Al. Bahrain, strong ally. Is it the Fifth Fleet that's in Bahrain? Different response to Bahrain as opposed to Libya.
Well, no, but there's a different response. Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Bahrain. They're all different countries. They all face different circumstances. The United States policy in the region is that we want to see political, economic, and social reform across the board. But how that evolves, will be different country by country. One of the central challenges in Bahrain is you have a Sunni king leading a majority Shia country. It's not necessarily the nature of the leadership that's suspect. It is the fact that you have winners and losers in a country like Bahrain. And for want of, at the risk of oversimplification, the Sunnis in Bahrain have done well, and the Shias in Bahrain not so much. So the real question is, can new leadership or can the government adapt and lead to a situation that narrows the gap between the haves and the have-nots? If that can be done, that's responsible leadership on behalf of the Bahraini government. But ultimately, it's not about just the presence of the fleet there. It's about the fact that Bahrain sits in a different situation than, say, in Egypt, and we've adapted our approach to each country based on the unique circumstances within those countries.
And the unique circumstances of Bahrain also factors in Iranian influence, does it not?
Well, we have a concern, as do other countries in the Gulf, about Iranian influence in the Gulf. Certainly, that is a paramount concern to the United States, a paramount concern to other countries as well.
Libya. You believe in the Libyan intervention by the United States?
I do.
Why?
Well, look at the evolution of how this has unfolded, and what Gaddafi has done is fundamentally different than what has happened, say, in Tunisia and in Egypt. I think it's important. Ben Ali was the first to face this changing dynamic in the region. Mubarak watched carefully what happened in Tunisia. Gaddafi watched carefully what happened in both Tunisia and Egypt. What sets Libya apart is the fact that he turned his military against his own people. Contrast that with Egypt. The Egyptian military said to the United States and others from the outset, whatever else happens, we will not turn our guns on our own people. And that allowed fundamental change to begin to occur in Egypt. Gaddafi has chosen a different route, and I believe in the limited use of military power to preserve the option for a political solution that brings new kind of leadership to Libya.
I want to read you an email from Nigeria, from Nonso Najide. And Nonso says, why has the US pulled its fighter planes out of Libya? Is that decision a tacit admission that the no-fly zone has failed? Of course, Gaddafi's firepower, particularly on the ground, has in no way been defeated completely. Has it failed?
No. NATO is still carrying out the no-fly and the protection mission. I think that's an appropriate use of military power. But ultimately, change in Libya will occur based on diplomacy and based on the economic pressure that continues to be placed on Gaddafi and his family.
What happens if Gaddafi stays long after the US is gone?
Well, the United States, the President has said it is the policy of the United States to create the conditions for change in Libya. So it's not a matter of the United States or others going away. And it's not just the United States.
But of course, the UN Security Council resolution is
the intervention
explicit,
followed
yes.
the UN Security Council resolution, as well as clear statements by the Arab League and by the Gulf countries. So the United States is not going away. The real question is, how can you use military power together with economic and political power to force Gaddafi to step aside? I think that is still very feasible, and I think that's still likely. I draw a comparison to Cote d'Ivoire. You have, as we sit here, Gbagbo, who has refused to recognize the results of an election last year. He's held on for several months, but it's been the determined work of the United Nations, the international community, and economic pressure that he now sits in a bunker, and inevitably he will have to yield power.
What lessons do you think the U.S. government, but even the State Department in particular, might have learned from the past 3 months, tumultuous 3 months, particularly with regards to the Arab Spring?
Well, I think what we learned going back to the intervention in Iraq in 2003, there have been tremendous change in Iraq, but it's come at a horrible, difficult, and extraordinary cost in terms of money, in terms of lives lost, Iraqi lives lost, American lives lost. I think we've relearned that to do these kinds of activities, you need to have regional consensus, international legitimacy, and the combined efforts of military force backed by strong diplomacy, backed by economic pressure. These are the kinds of constructive changes that can be done and can be sustained.
You've tweeted very recently about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the Guantanamo Bay 9/11 suspects. They're not going to be tried in civilian courts. They're going to be tried in military tribunals. You have a problem with that. Why?
Well, at the State Department podium, I would frequently advocate for the transparent rule of law. I think Guantanamo was a mistake to establish it in 2001. Every indication, based on my experience, is that we had the capability within the United States to detain and to try terrorists through civilian courts. Military tribunals have had a place in our history, but nothing in our experience tells me that we could not have tried Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or others in a civilian court.
Do you think that they'll get a fair trial?
I think that to the extent that we will make those tribunals as fair as possible. Are they able to deliver justice? They are. The real question to me is at what cost in terms of the example that we set to others. I would much rather have the 9/11 perpetrators in a civilian court than before a military tribunal.
As someone who still believes in the good intentions, if you like, of your government, you're not involved at the State Department anymore, but by and large you're still here defending many of the positions. How would you respond to those who say Barack Obama has been a severe letdown to the entire world from the perspective of promising to close Guantanamo Bay, but then reversing that?
The president has reaffirmed his hope to close Guantanamo. There's been opposition primarily within Congress that has literally prevented the transfer of detainees from Guantanamo to civilian courts. But during my time at the State Department, the one thing that we were able to do through the great efforts of Ambassador Dan Fried was to reduce the size of the problem. Over the past 2 years have been, with the help of other countries around the world, the transfer of detainees, resettlement of detainees to third countries. And so the challenge of Guantanamo was smaller than it was 2 years ago. The president still wants to close it. I think that's still the right policy. Unfortunately, we do not have consensus politically within the United States.
Okay, let's take another caller now. Mohammed's on the line. Mohammed, go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I would like to just to mention to Mr. Crowley about United States policy, the double standard. The whole way when you get to the Palestinian, nobody really care about these Palestinians. And they are human. And I'm calling here in behalf of the humanity. And I would like to see something change about the United States policy to the Palestinians. They are human, like us, like everyone. And also the Palestinians would like to see a homeland. And, demonstration after demonstration promised the Palestinian homeland, and they haven't delivered the promise.
Okay, Mohammed, thanks a lot for your call. I'm going to develop Mohammed's point a bit more, Mr. Crowley. The fact that when the US government had decided to stop pressuring Israel on the building of Israeli settlements, we had you on and you said this doesn't necessarily mean we've given up. It might signal a different approach. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Did you say
those words sound familiar?
Yeah, they do. Now that you're outside of the State Department, don't you think that perhaps you were spinning the message a bit?
No. I mean, it is still the policy of the United States to pursue comprehensive peace in the Middle East. No one said it was going to be easy. The missing ingredient is the absence of a direct negotiation, which I believe is still the only way, to achieve a viable Palestinian homeland. That is the desire of the United States, it's the desire of the American people. The United States is the leading contributor, to the development of the Palestinian Authority, and under the direction of Prime Minister Fayyad, there has been tremendous progress over the past couple of years. Improvements in security. The economy in the West Bank is growing very significantly. Unfortunately, there has not been the political dynamic that has enabled President Abbas and Prime Minister Netanyahu to sit together and to negotiate seriously. But that doesn't seem to be going anywhere at the present time.
You mentioned the United States is the biggest contributor to Palestinian aspirations. It's also the biggest contributor to Israel's coffers with $3 billion a year in aid. Now,
those are not mutually exclusive.
But somebody like Mohammed in North Carolina will say that how can you continue to give Israel that aid when it flagrantly violates international law by continuing to build those settlements?
Look,
that's what he means when he says
sure.
double standards.
I mean, it is frustrating, but ultimately the United States cannot force a Palestinian president and an Israeli prime minister to negotiate. We've done everything that we can over the past year and a half we had them seated together, and unfortunately the politics on both sides prevented the negotiations from continuing. I mean, it is right now a difficult road ahead. There's nothing meaningful going on between the two sides, but the United States will continue to hope that at some point the conditions will to occur that allows the negotiation to go forward.
An interesting subplot which seems to be at the nexus of this dynamic of the United States and its relationship to the quote-unquote Muslim world is Pastor Terry Jones now from Florida, Quran burning, and the response in Afghanistan that we've seen and others as well.
Very tragic.
Just take us into the thought process of someone in the State Department trying to deal with both Pastor Terry Jones and his rights under the First Amendment, not doing anything to him because of his freedom of speech, but also trying to hope that this doesn't jeopardize U.S. interests and, of course, trigger violent spasms as we saw in Afghanistan.
Sure. Well, there is a right of free speech in the United States, but every American citizen has to take responsibility for the consequences of that free speech. In my view, for Pastor Jones to say that he's not responsible for what happened in Afghanistan, I think is nonsense. He had to know, because we told him last fall that if you burn a Quran, there is going to be bloodshed and there are going to be consequences, lives lost, both in other countries as well as potentially American citizens. He knew how provocative what he did a few days ago was going to be. Now, that said, there has to be a better way of protesting. I certainly understand the outrage felt in Afghanistan and probably shared in other countries, but there's got to be a better way to demonstrate that outrage than to go out and find someone to kill.
Before we go, final question. What's next for you? You're going to write a book?
I have never thought about writing a book. I'm looking at a variety of options, perhaps teaching, perhaps going back to think tank work. I'll let you know.
Well, we appreciate having you as a guest, PJ Crowley. It's been fascinating.
Imran, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us. Well, that's it for this edition of the Riz Khan Show. Thank you very much for being with us. You can, of course, follow our program on Twitter. PJ Crowley tweets, by the way. You can follow him. We'll keep you notified on upcoming shows, and you can send us questions and comments to pose to our guests. On the next show, Conspiracy and Cover-Up, we talk to former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura about his latest book that blames the U.S. government for secretly starting wars, lying about terrorism, and experimenting on its own soldiers. Make sure to tune in for that, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.